Welcome to Saving UX. I'm your host, Jeremy Kriegel. Every episode, I talk to UX veterans about the challenges facing our practice and what we can do to make it better. This is the second half of my conversation with April Starr, Director of Experience Research for Motorola Solutions and the creator of the Cancer Worksheets, which you can find at www.cancerworksheets.com. If you missed part one, go back and listen to that. You can find it on most podcast platforms, YouTube, and at sux.live. That's SUX for Saving UX .live. There you can also find the show notes with links to lots of the things that we talk about in the conversation. And now, here's the rest of my talk with April Starr. How has it changed how you teach and maybe how you structure your curriculum, knowing what the world is going to be like for them? Granted, because you still have that foot in both worlds. You're not just someone who maybe worked for a while, but now is just in academia. Nothing against those people.
Well,
I'm
actually,
sure they have good experience.
Sure. Yeah, nothing against them. Well, actually, I started teaching because I could not hire from the Institute of Design. I'm sure they are really not going to be happy that I say this, but so I went to graduate school at the Institute of Design in Chicago. And when I worked at IDEO, I was leading the research team, or I guess they called it like human factors or whatever they called it then. And I could not hire from that school. I could not hire researchers from that school. And so I decided to teach a class that basically was structured to teach them all the skills that I wanted students to graduate with. And I can't remember what I had called it at first, but like nobody signed up. And then I called it service design, and then I had a waiting list because that was like the hot term. And I was just like, give me a fucking break. This is like, it's so ridiculous. But you know, the things that I wanted were, you know, people that were, you know, that had really strong storytelling skills, that like really were thoughtful about, you know, research and research methodology. You know, the Institute of Design, and this has probably changed, but you know, they talk a good game about research, and I think they definitely value research, and they teach their students to value research as a part of the process. They do not teach the students to do research or do it well. They don't teach them about sampling. They don't teach them about methodology, multiple methodologies. I mean, and again, I think it's gotten better, but at that time, they really did not do any of that. I wanted students to sort of, you know, come in and be able to frame a problem themselves, you know, and be able to move through a project really quickly. There were just a lot of skills, you know, synthesis skills, storytelling skills that so I basically built this class around it. I called it service design. The service design part was, you know, also, you know, you're also researching the organization that you're doing this project for, right? Because you can't, as a designer, you can't go off and like create ideas and solutions for a company that doesn't have the capability to deliver those solutions. So you always have to understand who you're designing for. And I feel like that's missing a little bit. That's why I've always thought, like, you know, although service design was like the hot thing for a while, it's really just design. To me, that's just responsible design. It's just like understanding the full context in which you're working. Although when you're a consultant, that's not always like part of the project. And you always have to fight to get that to be part of the project, unfortunately. But yeah, and then, you know, and then I kept teaching it over and over again, and it just became a thing, and I just really enjoyed teaching it, and the students enjoyed it, and then I got bored of it, and I stopped teaching it. And then I taught a few other things, and now I'm sort of contemplating teaching some new things, because I think now there are other skills that I'd like to see kind of students with. So yeah, my teaching strategy is basically like just teach the skills that I want to hire for,
That,
pretty
that's
much.
fantastic, and it's a perfect segue. So, like, what are the things you're going to teach next? What do you see lacking in the junior mid-level candidates that you're interviewing that you want to help them get better at?
Um, I mean, it's just, it's like kind of the same thing in a way, but it's just quickly framing up a problem and synthesis. Like, to me, it's like kind of simple. It's like research is just always about defining what are the dimensions of the problem that we're trying to solve. Like there's all these options in the world, and like we're just trying to hone in on like just the few that are the most meaningful, right? And then we want to pass that along to the designers, maybe not pass it, but like work with the designers on what those dimensions are, and then they're going to optimize the design based on those dimensions. um, and so I just want researchers to sort of speed up and get to those dimensions faster. And I know that like, my team at work is awesome. Like, in fact, we did this whole presentation workshop today around detectives, and the team did such a great job of like, these are all that, because it's impossible to characterize like a workflow of a detective because it's just, there's so many, it's so variable depending on the case and, the evidence and what happens. But like they outlined so many great, it could be this or this, like these are all the dimensions that we're working with. And so then we could have just like a really rich discussion as a team about like, well, what are we optimizing for here? Because, to me, design is not, I feel like design's real value is like, people in business or whatever, they're like, it's this or this, it's black or white, right? And design comes in and is like, well, no, it can be a shade of gray. And it's like research's job to like help kind of hone in on like what shade of gray. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like there are solutions that people aren't considering. And if we can outline just like what are the dimensions of those problems that are meaningful through the lens of like people's real experiences, the designs can get better. We can have a deeper understanding of, people's experiences. It's not, it's really not rocket science. It's sort of formulaic in a way. So I guess I'm hoping that the whole field of design gets to a point where it is a little bit more formulaic, I guess, because I think we've kind of done like a kind of a bad job in design education of like making it more complex or philosophical and not just really teaching like just this is what you do. This is how you think about research. This is how you think about synthesis. I mean, John Kolko. Strangely enough, I went to high school with John and then college with John. But like John, does such a great job in his books at like really clearly articulating this is how synthesis works. Like very specifically. This is how you do it. This is how like this is where it comes from. And I just think that we need more of that. Um, I don't know. It's not what we do. We maybe want to make it into this whole big thing. It's not. We can get to a point where we simplify it, we characterize it, not, not to make it so simple that like anybody can do it, right? It's still a skill. It's still a learned skill. But I do think that there are just like really specific ways of doing it that need to be taught in better ways.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think, especially at a high level, it certainly is. There's certain just general process and procedure that we go about, and whether in research or design, that is somewhat repetitive. What exact methods, tools, etc., you put into those higher level chunks can vary, and certainly at the execution level, there's a high level of skill. So I get what you say. There's a formula, but it's not. It's neither formulaic nor commoditizable.
Right. Like, I think the Institute of Design put out this book, like 101 methods. And I was like, oh God, this is like not right. This is not a good title. Because again, it like minimizes, but the idea that like, yeah, there's all these things in the toolkit. Now, when you actually look at that book, a lot of those methods are redundant. Like they're not, I don't know. I don't want to critique that book,
Stretching to get to 101.
but the point is that it's not, yeah, it's not really, I don't know. I just think we could be better. We could be a lot more concrete. And it's not about the method. It's just about, I don't know, specificity, I guess.
Earlier on, you talked about, one element of teaching is forcing you to better articulate your understanding of research, and kind of tangentially made me think about, and again, this is not to apply to you, but I've heard a lot of junior people maybe come out of a boot camp and they say, well, I couldn't find a job, so then I taught UX for a while. And on the one hand, I'm like, well, that does force you to better articulate what you know. And on the other hand, you don't really have much experience, but now you're teaching the next generation. And we don't have any types of, really certification or qualifications. We might get a degree in design, but even though there's not many of those out there. If someone is looking to get a design education, how should they evaluate the people who are going to be teaching them before they invest their hard-earned money or take out the loans?
God, that's such a great question. I don't even, I mean, I would look at like the percentage of full-time faculty to adjunct. Adjunct faculty, right, usually have a lot of work experience. And let's face it, design is an applied field. If you don't have practitioners teaching, then you're not going to get a sense of what the real world is like. I'm sorry to all of those professors that I really love that are tenured. But the reality is you need to work in the business context, to really, again, in that applied context, to understand like what's going on and really like what's the latest and greatest in design, in my opinion. I have yet to see any kind of PhD dissertation output that I use on a daily basis that's really valuable to me. Design is not outputting a body of work or literature that has been really valuable and pushed the field forward that I've seen. But like, prove me wrong. Send me an email if if you've seen something that you just think is great, like a framework that you use all the time. I'd love to see it. So
I haven't, but one of the guests I'm going to have on soon is a guy, Jay Bloom, who's getting his PhD in design from Carnegie Mellon also. So I'm really curious to talk to him about what is a PhD in design at CMU. You and I were at CMU much longer ago. What does that look like? I also know that, frankly, I don't understand a lot of his text, and I think that's probably on me. I need to read more clearly.
I'm definitely going to tune in for that one. I definitely want to hear that. I think the pursuit of a PhD in design, like, go for it. Like, if I had the time and energy to do that, that would be fun as hell. I'd much rather do that than like get beaten up by executives all day. But but I'm just saying that, like, at the end of the day, that the output, isn't really pushing things forward the way the practitioners in the applied context really are, trying to move things forward. And I just think that them bringing that knowledge to the classroom is really what's going to bring a lot of value to a design education.
That's another great topic to pivot to. Where do you look? You've got 20 plus years experience doing this. Where do you look for inspiration and to grow your practice and to get better at what you do? What are the challenges you're working on right now? And where are you looking for inspiration?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, not in business books. I do not read any business books if I can help it. I know that inevitably have to read, like the ones that everybody talks about just to be part of the gang. But I do not find business books inspiring in any way, shape, or form. I like looking elsewhere for inspiration. So, for example, I've always been, granted, I also work in the public safety space, but to me, legal arguments and the structure of arguments have always been really interesting to me in terms of how you present research, right? Research as evidence. How do you lay out a case? How do you separate the factual from like the narrative? So I'm really interested in that. I mean, it kind of depends on like what I'm thinking about. Lately, I mean, I'm studying, public safety and data maturity and things like that. And so right now, the Gabby Petito case has just been really interesting, just because of all of the content that's been released around it, and just all of like the social media and just like the crowdsourcing around it has just been really interesting to watch. So that's not necessarily about me, but it's sort of about my work. It's hard for me to separate my work and my like outside of work life, because I was like a true crime fan like before I started working at Motorola, and now that is like actually really relevant to my job. And so it's just like 24/7 sort of crime watch stuff. Where else do I look? I don't know.
Maybe this is a good chance. I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't. I mentioned at the beginning, like the cancer worksheets, and
Yeah.
these were created when your husband was diagnosed with cancer. Let me know if I get anything wrong here. And
Yeah.
the scenario was so difficult and confusing that you worked to come up with these series of sheets to help other patients navigate their experience. I get that right?
Yep. Perfect.
Now,
Yeah.
for me, I look at this and I kind of have two different views on it. One is, my gosh, here's someone who took a very real, personal, emotional problem, applied design to it to give this free tool to the world to make it better. How awesome is that? And that's, I think, the positive part. And the flip side for me is a bit of an indictment of the industry of like, why did you have to do that? What, like,
I feel the same way. Yeah.
what was
I felt
missing?
really angry. Yeah. After I published them, I felt really angry. I thought I'd feel some sort of relief, but I did feel angry that I was like, why do I have to do this? And it's like a worksheet. It's a piece of paper. Like, you can't fucking write stuff down for people. Yeah, I was angry. Yeah, that experience was terrible for 8 bazillion reasons. But the insight came to me actually because my husband, who worked at Gravity Tank, we went to grad school together, so he worked in design as well. He was this fantastic project planner, and it occurred to me that like this experience of being diagnosed with cancer is just really similar to a design project where, you sort of know generally where you want to go, but you just don't know how you're going to get there. Right. We knew generally that we wanted to get rid of the cancer. We just didn't know how we were going to get there. But there became a point in our experience where I had to make the decision about whether or not we were going to pursue additional treatment, or if that was that. And I realized that, I had information from the cardiology team. I had information from the, another team, but I didn't have information from his oncologist. And so I couldn't make the decision without that information. And it just shocked me that I didn't have that information from his oncologist, considering that the primary disease was cancer. And even things like, I mean, it's so surreal thinking about it now. Like we had gotten a second opinion, a remote second opinion, where you send your medical records to another cancer hospital, and then they'll send you sort of what they think based on the medical tests and records that you send to them. And I remember reading it at the dinner table, and it at one point it said, "I'm so sorry, that the cancer has spread to your brain." And I'm reading this at the dinner table. We didn't even know it had spread to his brain. Like they never even
Wow.
told us. And that's how my husband found out, like me just reading this at the table. And I just don't think that people should find out that way. And I have to tell you, being in the hospital and watching that experience unfold, I really lost my faith in design. At that point, I had a lot of students who really wanted to work in healthcare. I had worked in healthcare myself, and the whole time I'm like, here I am. I actually know, like that we're using the Epic record system. So I know that I can call this hospital because they also have the Epic record system, and that they can transfer records, but Epic can't transfer to this other hospital. Like I had some insider knowledge, and I'm like, here I am, a smart person. I have health insurance. I have a graduate degree, and I can't figure this shit out. I can't navigate this system. And I'm looking around at other people who don't speak English, who may not have health insurance, who just, who are maybe elderly. And I'm like, how are they? If I can't do this, how are they doing this? And I just was so angry. And I honestly am still angry. And I honestly don't know if I've really recovered. And I don't know if I really believe that design can solve any problem the way I used to think about design. It has really shaken me.
Well, let's get back to that, because that's going to be an interesting one. Before I forget, I do want to point out, one of the things I thought was really powerful about those worksheets, and I think this has come up a little bit in some of our other discussions about power dynamics, and whether teacher student, executive research, power dynamics are such a part of every conversation, and certainly doctor patient. And I remember when I was reading these, and one of the questions on the first worksheet is, how much experience do you have treating this type of cancer? And that question on there kind of blew me away. One is probably one most people don't think to ask, but
Yep.
what a challenge to that typical power dynamic, and what an important piece of information that would be to have in making treatment decisions. How trustworthy, how knowledgeable is this person really that I'm partnering with?
Well, and that's one of the unfortunate lessons that we learned from this experience, because the primary care physician that I actually recommended to my husband, because I loved her so much, she was part of this hospital system. So when he had early symptoms, she referred him to, somebody else, and then, within the hospital system, and then he got referred to somebody else, and then somebody else. And by the time we got to the oncologist, um, we were just in this hospital system, and we didn't think to ask that question. And, for those that don't know, every cancer has like a protocol for how to treat it. So technically any oncologist can treat any kind of cancer, but that doesn't mean they should. And that doesn't mean that they are skilled in it. And the type of cancer that my husband had was a very rare form of cancer that only a handful of people actually specialize in. And the oncologist never talked about this at all, and never even mentioned, like, hey, you should, like, you should really look at other hospitals. There are other hospitals that are better than us for this. But of course, why would they ever say that? They want the money. So it was just upsetting. And I never realized that I should have asked that question. So that's why it's on the worksheet.
Yeah,
sadly.
it's really powerful. And I'm sorry that came from such a personal experience. You said a moment ago you don't think that design can solve these big problems. Um, is, why or what? Either why do you think that's the case now, and maybe what would have to change that would enable us to do that so that individuals wouldn't be in the position of doing it themselves?
Well, I mean, at least in healthcare, you know, I mean, no matter what anybody says, at least in the US, it's profits before patients. I mean, no matter who says they're patient centered, they're not. They can't be. It's not possible. No one is willing to take a loss and put the patient first. Never seen it. Not possible. I don't believe it. So, I mean, it's the same reason why at work, I have to reframe research in terms of the financial impact it will have to the business. Finances come first, profit first. They're never going to put user experience over profit. So, I think in a different model of healthcare, universal healthcare, right? That maybe that could change. But, I think the problem is that, designers and the field of design, I mean, to really solve these problems, you have to know so much about so many things, right? You have to understand organizational behavior. You have to understand economics. You have to understand psychology. I mean, it's to really solve these problems, the things you have to understand are so complex. And I'm just not sure. I know that we all want to believe that we're smart enough that we can do it. I think we care, and that's awesome. And we want to solve those problems, and that's great. And that is awesome. And I hope we all keep caring and wanting to solve these problems. I just don't think that we can. I think we can solve some of them or part of the problem. I think we can chip away at those problems. But I also think it's kind of arrogant, though, of design to be like, oh, we can solve these problems. We can't, and we need to partner with other people to be able to solve those problems. We cannot do it alone.
And it sounds like you're also saying that these solutions are probably going to happen outside of the typical market environment.
I mean, incentives play such a huge role. Design is about change. Incentives are about change as well, right? I mean, you have to understand what motivates people to change. So I don't know. It's a tough one. I mean, I've really wrestled with it. I mean, honestly, I felt similarly after my pregnancy. I had a really tough, postpartum experience, and I felt, the same way. I was just like, I'm not sure if design, can solve problems like this. When it just comes to mental health and when you're struggling with these healthcare issues, and even in public safety, our team is going to start working on, we're going to start studying some issues around domestic violence, and I'm trying to be very conscious about what can we tackle and what can't we. We just finished working on a project around homelessness that we are now piloting to see if it works. But I have a lot of, I'm hopeful, but I have a lot of skepticism as well, so I don't know.
I think it's a really good point. Even in my intro, I talk about I believe that UX can change the world, but I agree with you. It's UX in conjunction with all these other disciplines that bring very specific expertise and understanding. Then adding UX can make a big difference, but UX by itself and design by itself, we don't bring that those domain specific depths to the table. Well,
Yeah.
maybe before we wrap up, again, you've had a long career. You've been consultant, you've been on internal teams, you've been individual contributor, you're a leader, you've been an educator. Do you have any particular bits of advice that you would give to folks who are starting out now? Things that they should do or should avoid, or anything that you'd share?
Okay, two things. You can't have it all, so don't try. Like, you can either have like a good topic, good people to work with, or like a good good company. Like, you can't really have all three, I feel like. So you got to like pick, 2 out of 3. So you can't have it all, but like, I don't know. I've always just followed like things that I'm interested in. Like, I've never been the kind of person that can work on content that I am not into. I like hard problems. And so I just, if, I don't know, if you're into toilet paper, go work at Kimberly-Clark. You know what I mean? Like, no judgment, but like, just go follow whatever you're interested in, My interest is like nerdy or like true, my interest is true crime. And here I am working in public safety, like, just follow whatever you're into. I think that's the best thing. Just stay engaged in what you love doing. It'll keep you there. It'll keep you putting up with the mean executives that you have to deal with day to day. So.
I like how you put those 3 together, because I think, well, I like you, I also like the hard problems. And I used to think of myself as someone who was very domain driven. But a couple of years ago, I really started looking at, it was between jobs, like, where are the places that I really enjoyed working? And it was, they were all over the domain space. And it really had to do with really engaged collaborative teams. That environment, the people, really what was drove me, so that it really changed how I started looking for and evaluating potential opportunities.
Oh, another thing, and I tell people this all the time because it was a huge revelation for me, is don't be confused about what you're good at and what gets you excited, because there's a difference. There are things that you're good at, and people are going to keep pushing you towards things that you're good at. But sometimes the things you're good at are also things that drain you.
Yeah.
And that's a problem in your career. Like, there was a time in my career where I was constantly pushed towards things that just drained me. And I was good at them though. And it was hard to find people like me that were good at certain types of things. Like, for example, I was constantly pushed into financial services because, April's good at financial services, but I didn't like financial services. So, that's a problem, and it's like, you want to feel like, people think I'm good at something, so I want to make them happy and proud, but like, don't do that. The things, when you get into your flow and when you're really energized, like, be in tune with that kind of stuff. And like, that's the stuff that you should do more of. That was a big revelation for me.
So how did you make that break from financial services? Like, what allowed you to finally either say no or, redirect your energy somewhere else?
Well, I got knocked up. So I can't really recommend that as advice. But I mean,
you took a break.
I took a break. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I took a break.
Was there a second thing? You said there was 2 things that, or maybe that was your 2 things. You talk about being passionate.
No, I think
that was your 2 things. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great place. I just want to let people know, if you're looking for the Cancer Worksheets, you can find those at www.cancerworksheets.com. You can check out sux.live for the show notes and links to the different people, books, all the stuff that we've talked about. I'll put up links there. And just once again, I'd like to thank April Starr. Thank you so much for joining me today and being so open and blunt. I think it's just awesome. I always love talking to you.
Thanks so much. It was great being here.